Canada joins forces with the EU to retaliate against U.S. steel tariffs, rolling out a massive $20 billion counterplan. And brace yourself, the economic damage heading for the U.S. could hit $2 trillion. Yes, you heard that right. That's the staggering amount experts say could vanish from America's economy if Trump's tariff-heavy strategy continues. In response, the European Union has taken bold action, shifting capital, supply chains, and billion-dollar deals away from the U.S., instead deepening ties with Canada and fast-growing Asian markets. If this plan goes through, the U.S. could suffer an unprecedented $2 trillion loss, a direct blow to the core of the U.S. EU Partnership. Trump once accused the EU of taking advantage of America for years. But now Brussels is proving it can not only survive without Washington, it may actually thrive. So, is this the collapse of a 70-year alliance? Or is it simply a strong-arm tactic to get the White House to back down on tariffs? And if Trump plays this wrong, who really stands to lose everything in this global trade showdown? Let's break it all down in today's video. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss any new updates from Deep State. With trade tensions boiling between the United States and the European Union, the EU's warning to cancel a $43.2 billion aircraft deal with Boeing isn't just economic retaliation. It's a bold political message. It reflects Europe's growing resistance to Trump's go-it-alone tariff strategy. Back in 2018, Trump launched a 25% tariff on steel and 10% on aluminum coming from the EU, citing national security. By 2025, those tariffs had returned and expanded. A fresh 25% tariff hit European cars and auto parts, alongside a blanket 10% tariff on most other imports. Europe pushed back with repeated offers of a zero-for-zero trade deal, no tariffs from either side. But Washington wasn't interested. In the meantime, key European sectors, including automotive, heavy machinery, and wine, were taking heavy losses. In return, the EU hit back. A 25% tariff now affects $23 billion worth of U.S. exports, corn, wheat, motorcycles, and clothing among them. And there's more on the way. The EU is preparing a $114 billion tariff package focused on U.S. cars and Boeing aircraft, a direct threat to America's key export industries if talks don't move forward. The EU's threat to scrap Boeing deals in favor of Airbus or even China's COMAC shows how deep the trust gap has grown. Irish airline Ryanair says it may cancel a $30 billion order for 330 Boeing 737 MAX planes if tariffs drive up prices. CEO Michael O'Leary even hinted at turning to COMAC if the deal proves cheaper. And it's not just aviation. Other American companies are feeling the pain too. Tesla, under Elon Musk, has seen sales plummet in Europe. German sales have dropped almost 60% amid backlash tied to far-right political associations. In Sweden, Tesla's sales dropped a stunning 81% compared to the same time last year. These trade frictions are now weighing heavily on the U.S. economy. In the first quarter of 2025, U.S. GDP fell by 0.3%, the first economic contraction since 2022. Why? Many companies rushed to stock up on imports before tariffs took effect, causing a 41.3% surge in imports and pushing the trade deficit to a record $140.5 billion. The U.S. Federal Reserve has raised alarms, warning that chaotic tariff policies could bring higher inflation, slower economic growth, and job losses. In short, Europe's Boeing threat is just one part of a wider pushback against America's protectionist moves. If the United States refuses to change course, the economic fallout could grow worse, even among long-standing allies. As tensions climb between Washington and Brussels, the European Union has rolled out a growing list of retaliatory actions to defend its economy and challenge the United States. In April 2025, the European Union imposed new tariffs worth €2 billion, around $23 billion on a range of U.S. exports, including steel, aluminum, motorcycles, and clothing, following Trump's tariff hike. Now, the EU is preparing a much larger response. An additional €100 billion, which is about $113 billion in tariffs, targeting high-value U.S. sectors like aviation, agriculture, and tech if trade talks break down. But the EU isn't just fighting tariffs with tariffs. It's also taking legal action. Through the World Trade Organization, the EU launched a formal challenge to U.S. trade moves, claiming they violate Article 21 of the JT Agreement, which only allows trade restrictions in legitimate national security emergencies. The EU argues that targeting longtime allies like Europe, who pose no threat, is an abuse of power and undermines global free trade. In June 2018, the European Union formally requested talks with the United States at the World Trade Organization. The case, registered as DS 548, marked the start of a legal battle that continued for years. By 2022, the WTO ruled in Europe's favor, declaring the U.S. couldn't use national security as a blanket excuse for protectionist tariffs. This gave Europe a strong legal foundation to take retaliatory trade actions against American goods if the U.S. ignored the ruling. To support industries hit by U.S. tariffs, some EU countries rolled out financial aid programs. For example, Spain introduced a €14.1 billion or $15.66 billion support package to assist key sectors like olive oil and the automotive industry in dealing with the effects of the tariffs. These retaliatory steps from the EU have added economic pressure on the United States. It's not just big corporations like Boeing or Tesla feeling the pinch. Everyday Americans are deeply affected. When trade wars escalate, U.S. products face steeper tariffs in Europe, causing sales to drop, factories to scale back, and jobs to disappear. American agriculture, which depends heavily on exports, has taken a serious hit. Commodity prices have plunged, while the cost of things like fertilizer and raw materials has surged due to global supply disruptions. In the Midwest, where soybean and corn exports to Europe once provided steady income, a wave of bankruptcies has swept through small family farms. And it's not just producers suffering. U.S. tariffs on European imports have also raised costs for consumers. When European parts used in cars, electronics, or industrial machines are taxed more, the price of the final product climbs. In short, Americans are footing the bill for a trade conflict they didn't ask for. As of 2024, Eurostat reports that the EU exported €531.6 billion worth of goods to the US, while US exports to the EU totaled only €333.4 billion, leaving a European trade surplus of €198.2 billion. By targeting hundreds of billions in American goods, the EU isn't just retaliating, it's using this trade imbalance as leverage to turn up the pressure. In today's world, where trade is a major geopolitical tool, no country can stay completely out of the fray. Each tariff or WTO ruling sends out economic shockwaves, and American workers and shoppers are feeling those waves hit close to home. Beyond tariffs, the EU has also quietly strengthened its ties with other global trade partners to reduce its dependency on the U.S. market. A key example is the growing partnership with Canada under the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, or CETA, which is helping the EU build a stronger global economic position. CETA, signed in 2016 and in provisional effect since September 2017, is a wide-ranging free trade deal between the EU and Canada. It immediately removed 98% of tariffs, and by 2024, nearly all remaining trade barriers are expected to be gone. This has made it easier for goods and services to flow between the two economies, encouraging more investment and business expansion on both sides. One area seeing strong growth under CETA is high-tech and clean energy. The EU and Canada have launched joint initiatives to develop clean technology, including the CETA Clean Technology Summit held in 2022, a major event aimed at boosting trade, investment, and innovation between the two regions. In this area, the two sides are also working closely to build strong and varied supply chains, especially at a time when the world is dealing with climate change and energy security challenges. Defense collaboration is another key focus for both the EU and Canada. They've improved communication and coordination on regional and global security matters, including efforts to keep peace and stability in the Indo-Pacific region. This kind of teamwork not only boosts safety for both partners, but also supports a global system based on rules and cooperation. However, CETA still faces some pushback within the EU itself. Certain member countries like France have raised concerns about the deal's possible effects on farming and the environment. In March 2024, the French Senate voted against ratifying CETA, arguing it was important to protect farmers and defend national food security. Even so, the agreement is still being applied provisionally and continues to bring real economic benefits to both Canada and the EU. By deepening its cooperation with Canada through CETA, the EU is clearly aiming to diversify its economic partnerships and become less reliant on the United States. This is especially important now, as the U.S. continues to use one-sided tariffs and moves toward trade protectionism. The EU wants to find trusted partners to help secure long-term economic growth and stability. This change affects not just big corporations like Boeing, but could also hit the U.S. economy more broadly, especially as GDP growth shows signs of slowing. To sum it up, CETA is more than just a trade deal between Canada and the EU. It reflects the EU's wider plan to boost its global economic and political strength during a time of fast-changing global politics. Alongside Canada, the EU is working hard to find new markets and support green diplomacy, cutting down on its dependence on the US while raising its global influence. One major part of this plan is working more closely with new economic partners, especially by negotiating and signing free trade agreements. The EU is focusing heavily on ties with Indo-Pacific countries, including restarting trade talks with Malaysia and building stronger relations with Vietnam, thanks to the EU-Vietnam Free Trade Agreement, which started in 2020. At the same time, the EU is widening its ties with countries in Africa and the Middle East, such as Egypt and Saudi Arabia, to diversify sources of energy and raw materials. In addition to growing its market access, the EU is also stepping up exports of clean tech and renewable energy, such as wind, solar, and hydrogen. Under the REPowerEU Plan, the goal is to produce and import 20 million tons of renewable hydrogen by 2030, helping reduce fossil fuel use and move toward greener energy. Countries like Spain and Germany are investing heavily in hydrogen, while joint projects with Egypt and Morocco aim to bring more green energy into Europe. A report from the European Commission lays out plans for $45 billion in clean energy funding and $800 million specifically for hydrogen by 2030. The EU is also exploring one-on-one negotiations with countries like Vietnam, Malaysia, and Saudi Arabia to boost cooperation on clean tech and renewable energy. These partnerships will help the EU secure sustainable energy sources, but they also create new economic opportunities with developing nations, supporting broader global economic progress. Altogether, the EU's deals and projects in green energy and clean technology could be worth trillions of dollars in the years to come. Over the next decade, this reflects the EU's strong dedication to creating a greener and more sustainable economy. These actions by the EU are not just a response to the U.S. tariff policies. They're also part of a long-term plan to reshape the global economic system. One striking move is the EU's threat to cancel a $43.2 billion aircraft order from Boeing. This isn't just a trade retaliation. It's a much bigger strategy that ties into how the EU is reorganizing its defense and security partnerships after Brexit. This moment marks a key shift in how the EU is redefining its defense plans and exploring both new opportunities and new challenges in its relationship with the United Kingdom, a country that, though no longer a member, still plays a major role in Europe's security landscape. After the UK left the EU, the bloc lost one of its most powerful military allies. This has pushed the EU to boost defense cooperation among its members and to search for new partnerships to safeguard regional stability. One of the most important programs is the Permanent Structured Cooperation, or PESCO, launched in 2017. Its goal is to promote stronger coordination in defense among EU member nations. PESCO enables countries to work together on developing military technologies, sharing tools and information, and launching joint defense projects, all to strengthen the EU's collective defense capabilities. Alongside PESCO, the European Defence Fund, or EDF, was also set up to provide funding for defense-related research and innovation. The EDF helps European defense firms collaborate more, rely less on outside suppliers, and increase Europe's strategic independence. However, the UK's exit left a noticeable gap. The UK is among the top defense spenders in Europe and houses many key defense companies. Without its participation in projects like PESCO and EDF, questions arise about what future defense cooperation between the EU and the UK might look like. Even though the United Kingdom is no longer part of the European Union, it remains essential to Europe's security network. Both the EU and the UK agree that keeping a close defense relationship is crucial. Recently, there have been encouraging developments. In May 2025, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer was invited to the EU Leaders Summit, a sign that post-Brexit defense ties are warming up. Still, building a formal defense partnership is not easy. Discussions are ongoing around access to EU defense funding, intelligence sharing, and participation in joint operations. Legal and political barriers also make the process more complicated. At the same time, the EU is strengthening its ties with other non-member nations. For instance, Canada has joined PESCO's military mobility program, which aims to simplify and harmonize military transport across EU borders. Canada's involvement proves that the European Union is open to working with outside partners to boost regional security. To summarize, the European Union's threat to scrap Boeing's multi-billion-dollar order is more than just retaliation. It's part of a wider plan to realign defense and security strategies after Brexit. This shift presents a chance for the European Union to improve internal military cooperation, attract new allies, and redefine its global security role. Vital player. But it also brings difficulties in keeping a strong partnership with the United Kingdom, a vital player now outside the bloc. Clearly, the European Union is making bold moves, from threatening to cancel major United States aircraft deals, hitting back with tariffs, expanding trade ties with Asia-Pacific countries, and reshaping its post-Brexit defense strategy. All these steps show that Brussels is done being a quiet follower of Washington. The EU is steadily building a multipolar economic and defense system, one where it sets its own rules, protects its interests, and increases its influence without relying heavily on the United States. But the real question is, can the EU keep this momentum going long-term, especially when it must balance the huge economic benefits of its transatlantic relationship with the need for internal political stability? And that's all while facing rising populism, energy problems, and growing pressure from China. If you found this topic fascinating and want to keep up with the latest in global politics and defense affairs, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any new videos from Deep State.